New Orleans, 1847. Midnight heat pressed against the mansion walls like a living thing, trapping whispers inside its corridors. 13 bodies lay beneath white linen, their twisted faces locked in frozen screams. The doctor's report called it fever. But in the margins, in handwriting meant never to be read, he described something far more sinister. Fingernails blackened, tongues swollen purple, throats closing as if strangled by invisible hands. Every death came 90 minutes after supper. Every death, except one. Her name was Violet. The head cook, a kitchen slave whose hands fed kings of commerce, men who built empires on sugar and blood. That night, she alone lived to watch the entire Bogard bloodline rot from the inside out. But here's the truth they buried. Violet didn't survive by chance. She orchestrated it. What happened inside that kitchen was no accident. It wasn't poison. It was ritual. And when you understand who Violet really was, and the secret that had been passed through her bloodline since before Louisiana was even a colony, you'll see why this story has been locked away for 178 years. Stay with me. What I'm about to tell you was never meant to be heard. Violet was born in chains, the daughter of Essie, a woman who died young under the weight of the Bogard estate. From 14, Violet's life was fire and iron. Her world was the kitchen, a room that smelled of sweat, spices, and fear. Every meal she prepared was a performance of obedience, every dish a reminder that her body, her mind, and her very soul belonged to another. She learned quickly that survival required more than skill. It demanded silence, invisibility, and patience. But there is a breaking point even the most disciplined cannot ignore. It came when Samuel, the stablemaster's son, entered her life. Their love was dangerous, forbidden, yet intoxicating. Every stolen glance, every whispered word in the dark corridors of the mansion was a defiance of the rules that governed slaves and masters alike. And then came the day Octave Bogard noticed. The man's cruelty had always been methodical, surgical, but now it became volatile, unpredictable, a storm bent on destruction. Violet witnessed his fury as Samuel's back was lashed, his cries echoing off the courtyard walls. The powerlessness she felt wasn't just anger, it was a revelation. That night, something inside her shattered and reformed into something sharper, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The first seeds of vengeance were planted in blood, and in that kitchen, she began to plot. Pain became Violet's teacher. Hunger, exhaustion, and humiliation sharpened her mind into a weapon. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, invisible yet omnipresent, observing every cruelty, memorizing every weakness, every insult, every lash, every bite of her own food withheld was filed away, not in despair, but in calculation. The kitchen was no longer a place of labor. It was her command center, the forge where her vengeance was being perfected. Violet learned the patterns of the Bogards. She memorized the timing of meals, the rhythm of their conversations, the exact moments when each member of the household lowered their guard. She understood their desires and fears, and more importantly, she learned to anticipate them. There is a certain darkness that descends when someone realizes they can take power from those who have always oppressed them. For Violet, it was intoxicating. It whispered promises of justice and retribution that were both terrifying and liberating. And then came the poison, no ordinary toxin, but one derived from herbs and spices she had studied in secret, taught by her mother's old grimoire of hidden remedies. It was invisible, silent, precise. The Bogards would never see it come. Bang! By the time the first course was served that fateful Sunday, Violet's plan was already in motion. Every spice, every simmer, every carefully folded napkin was a step toward annihilation. The Bogard mansion was a world built on fear, fear wielded like a weapon by Octave, fear internalized by all who lived beneath his roof. Yet in this empire of intimidation, Violet was beginning to rewrite the rules. She had spent years absorbing every secret, who drank too much brandy to maintain composure, who relied on servants to silence their sins, who underestimated the very people they called property. Every flaw, every arrogance, every hidden vice became ammunition. By now, Violet no longer saw herself as a slave. She was an observer of human fragility, a master of timing and precision. The psychological weight of years of oppression had crystallized into a single, unshakable purpose. She would reclaim her power, but not in small, cautious measures. No, she would obliterate the foundation of the Bogard family in one calculated strike. She moved through the kitchen with the grace of a predator, tasting nothing, knowing everything. Her hands were steady, her mind a labyrinth of contingency plans. Even the other slaves sensed the shift. Something dangerous had awakened in her, a silent storm that could no longer be ignored. And as the Sunday supper approached, Violet's internal transformation was complete. Hunger had sharpened her intellect, suffering had honed her patience, and rage had tempered her resolve. She was no longer the girl born in chains. She was inevitability itself. Sunday arrived like a slow drumbeat, oppressive and inevitable. The mansion shimmered with wealth, chandeliers catching the light like suspended stars, silverware gleaming with the promise of refinement. The Bogards believed themselves untouchable, masters of a world that bent to their whims. They did not see Violet as anything but a servant, a fixture in the background, a mindless conduit for their indulgence. She watched them enter the dining room, every step, every posture, every smile, catalogued and understood. Octave at the head of the table, proud, arrogant, imagining control over lives he could not truly command. Celeste, poised, fragile, devoted to appearances, the children obedient yet petty and cruel in their inherited entitlement. Every guest, every shadowed glance, every whispered remark, a thread in the web she was about to tighten. Violet moved like a spectre among them, arranging plates, pouring wine, garnishing the courses with precision only a lifetime in servitude could perfect. Each spice was measured with mathematical accuracy, each sauce adjusted not for flavor, but for effect. The herbs she had learned to wield in secret would touch their lips and minds, silent assassins of taste and consciousness. The house smelled of roasting fowl and burning candles, yet beneath the aroma was the unnoticeable scent of transformation, a single night that would rewrite history. In the corner of her mind, Violet smiled. Their last supper had begun. It began subtly. A cough from Henri, the twin boy, dismissed as dust in the summer air. A shiver from Celeste, shrugged off as a draught. Octave muttered about indigestion, convinced his body was rebelling against excess. But Violet watched, unseen, as each reaction unfolded like a pre-written script. She had orchestrated every step, timed every effect, and now the Bogards were trapped in a rhythm they could not escape. The symptoms escalated quickly, tongues swelling, faces paling, eyes rolling in terror. Panic rippled through the room, confusion blending with fear as the family realized something was horribly wrong. Yet they still believed themselves untouchable, still blind to the hands that had served them. Every sip, every bite, every breath they took drew them closer to annihilation. Violet remained composed, her hands steady as she cleared plates, poured wine, and moved through the chaos with the quiet precision of someone observing prey fall into a trap. Her gaze swept the room like a predator, calculating her next move. She was no longer a cook. She was executioner, orchestrating the demise of a lineage built on cruelty and oppression. Outside, the Louisiana night pressed against the windows, humid and still, as if the air itself had conspired with her. The mansion, a monument to wealth and terror, now became the stage for the reckoning that would echo through history, unseen, unrecorded, and yet eternal. By the second course, the mansion was a theater of agony, faces twisted, Bodies convulsed, and screams, low at first, then rising in pitch, shattered the gilded illusion of gentility. Octave's roar of disbelief filled the dining room as his children clutched at each other, their aristocratic composure evaporating like mist. Celeste fell to her knees, choking on the horror she could neither control nor understand. Every death followed the rhythm Violet had calculated. 90 minutes after the first taste, one by one, the Bogards succumbed to the carefully measured torment. No physician, no guest, no onlooker could intervene. Their wealth, status, and privilege were powerless against what she had engineered. Even the old butler Moses felt the shift. Something elemental had entered the room, something beyond fear or vengeance. And yet, Violet did not panic. Hunger and years of suffering had honed her into a force of cold clarity. Her hands moved as they always had, plating, serving, adjusting, but each gesture was a silent affirmation of control. The kitchen was no longer a place of labor. It was her dominion, a kingdom where she alone determined life and death. Outside, the humid night pressed close. Windows rattled as if the city itself recognized the violation occurring within the mansion walls. By the time the last candle flickered, the Bogard dynasty, built on blood and cruelty, had been reduced to silence. And Violet? She stood unbroken, a spectre in the aftermath, the embodiment of inevitability. When the screams finally ceased, a suffocating silence fell over the Bogard mansion. The chandelier swung gently, scattering fractured light across faces now frozen in death, or in some cases, frozen in fear and disbelief. Violet stood at the threshold of the dining room, her body exhausted, her stomach empty, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and in that crossing something fundamental shifted. This was not merely survival, this was metamorphosis. Violet had turned suffering into strategy, oppression into power. She understood, in a way no one else in New Orleans ever could, the hidden structures that govern fear, obedience, and control. She had become the master of the very system designed to enslave her. For decades afterward, the city whispered her name in veiled references, in coded stories meant to frighten, instruct, or glorify. Yet the official archives remained blank, the deaths explained away as fever, misfortune, or divine wrath. Only a select few, like Dr. Thibodeau, glimpsed the true nature of the event, an intelligence operating behind the veneer of propriety, a mind forged in agony and perfected in secrecy. Violet's legend became a warning hidden in plain sight. And now, as you listen, understand this. There are forces in history, in human society, that will never be documented. They move in shadows, shaping reality, rewriting what you think you know. To witness such a truth is dangerous. Comment twice below. The shadows remember to anchor yourself in what you're about to see. Do it now. Violet's act was more than revenge. It was revelation. In one night, she exposed the fragility of power built on cruelty, the vulnerability of systems that believed themselves absolute. The Bogard dynasty had ruled with wealth, brutality, and unquestioned authority. And yet, a single mind, forged in sophor, fearing and sharpened by oppression, had dismantled it from the inside out. This is the truth most histories refuse to tell. Control is never absolute. Tyranny thrives only when obedience is unquestioned, only when fear suppresses knowledge. Violet had weaponized both her skill and the very ignorance of her oppressors. Every measured gesture in that kitchen, every herb and spice, every second of timing, was a masterclass in psychological domination. And consider this, the system that allowed her suffering was not unique to the Bogards. It was replicated across plantations, cities, and nations. Wealth and status create illusions of invincibility, while the oppressed learn to survive by memorizing every detail, every vulnerability, every crack in the armor of their masters. Violet's story is proof. Power always has its weaknesses. Its Achilles heel often wears the face of those deemed powerless. The city moved on, the mansion remained, empty, silent, yet the echoes of what had transpired continued to resonate through generations. Hidden truths, suppressed histories, they are the shadows under civilization's gleaming floorboards. And now you, watching this, have glimpsed one. Violet's transformation was not merely physical or tactical, it was psychological, almost ritualistic. Years of oppression had taught her to read minds, anticipate movements, and calculate outcomes with precision. Her suffering had become a curriculum in control, teaching her not only how to survive, but how to dominate. She had internalized the very logic of fear and turned it against its creators. This is the essence of forbidden knowledge, understanding that the systems designed to enslave, humiliate, and control can be inverted. The masters of the Bogard mansion believed themselves architects of reality, but Violet learned the same lesson that secret societies, ancient cults, and shadowed cabals have known for millennia. Power is not in wealth or force. True power resides in timing, observation, and the subtle manipulation of perception. In that kitchen, she had become a living code, a nexus where suffering and intelligence merged into something unstoppable. Every gesture, every meal, every silent calculation was a step in a ritual older than the city itself. She was not only surviving, she was awakening, tapping into currents of influence and control that few ever glimpse. And remember this, anyone who thinks oppression is permanent has never met someone like Violet. She is a blueprint for the dangerous few, those who transform trauma into unassailable authority. The Bogard mansion became a tomb, its silence louder than any scream. But New Orleans itself never forgot. Whispers traveled through the Garden District and beyond, carried on humid winds through Spanish moss-draped streets, murmured in markets, bars, and back alleys. Violet's act had become a phantom presence, a lesson hidden in plain sight. Cruelty carries consequences, and every system has a crack waiting to be exploited. Yet the city's elite, those still wearing the masks of respectability, buried the truth deep. They codified the deaths as fever, misfortune, divine punishment. Official records omitted her name, and for decades, Violet became a ghost in history, both present and absent, terrifying in her absence, omnipotent in her silence. Only the shadows remembered, only those who dared observe closely recognized the pattern of power she had rewritten. And this is what the elite fear most, knowledge that overturns the illusion of control. Violet exposed the machinery of obedience, revealing the vulnerability beneath wealth and legacy. She became a symbol of the unseen force that always exists behind the polished surface of civilization. Every whispered story, every margin note in an old journal, every warning passed from servant to servant became part of the invisible network of memory. The world she left behind was a lesson in intelligence, patience, and the subtle art of vengeance. After that night, Violet was no longer a cook, no longer a slave, no longer merely human in the way the Bogards had understood it. She had become something else, a repository of knowledge, a master of timing, a sovereign of consequence. Pain, hunger, and oppression had been her mentors. Fear had been her instrument. She carried the weight of what she had done with absolute clarity, every decision deliberate, every thought honed into precision. Her transformation was both psychological and almost alchemical. She understood systems, hierarchies, and human behavior in a way the Bogards never could. Each gesture, each glance, each calculated delay had rewritten the rules of engagement between master and servant. Violet had discovered the truth hidden beneath centuries of control. Obedience is an illusion, and dominance is born not from force, but from knowledge and patience. And she did not stop there. She became a living archive of power, a dark mentor in the shadows of a society that refused to acknowledge her existence. Any man who underestimated her would see his world crumble with terrifying efficiency. Every whisper about her, every margin note in a forgotten journal, every shadowed anecdote became a fragment of a legacy meant to endure beyond memory. Violet's mind had become her dominion, and through it she achieved the kind of mastery that civilizations have feared for millennia. Violet's vengeance was not just personal, it was symbolic, a reckoning with a system older than New Orleans itself. Her act mirrored patterns seen across centuries, the oppressed turning the machinery of power against their oppressors, hidden intelligence dismantling visible authority, suffering transforming into strategy. Empires had fallen this way, not with armies, but with minds awakened to truths the rulers could not perceive. She had tapped into something ancient, something deliberately obscured. Knowledge of timing, observation, and manipulation, wisdom passed down through generations, whispered in secret societies, hidden in herbals and grimoires, ignored by those who thought themselves masters. Violet's story is a reminder. History is never neutral. Every dynasty, every elite, every household built on subjugation carries the seeds of its own undoing. And in that mansion, she became the fulcrum of inevitability. Each Bogard who perished did so not by chance, but by the precise application of knowledge honed in silence and suffering. The psychological architecture of control, when understood, can be inverted with devastating efficiency. This is why her story was erased, why the archives lie, why the truth exists only in shadows. For those willing to see it, Violet's act is a map, a blueprint for understanding power, for mastering influence, for recognizing the hidden currents that run beneath civilization itself. The ripples of Violet's act extended far beyond the walls of the Bogard mansion. Those who survived, those who heard whispers, those who observed her in secret, all were forever altered. Fear, yes, but also awe. They recognized, even if only subconsciously, that they had witnessed something beyond ordinary comprehension. The power of a mind honed in suffering, a will unbroken, a strategy executed with surgical precision. Power, after all, is not about domination by force. It is about control over perception. Violet had rewritten the rules of engagement in a society built on illusions. Every plantation overseer, every merchant, every aristocrat who caught a shadow of her story learned a hidden lesson. Systems can be dismantled from within. Authority is fragile. The appearance of invulnerability is a lie. And the enslaved community, those who survived in the margins, carried her knowledge forward. Not the mechanics of the poison, but the deeper understanding, patience, observation, strategy, and the subtle manipulation of timing and expectation. Violet became more than a cook. She became a symbol of forbidden wisdom, a template for mental mastery under oppression. Now, if you followed closely, understand this. The same patterns exist today in workplaces, governments, social hierarchies. Control is always a facade. Comment twice below, "The shadows remember," to anchor yourself in this hidden understanding and lock in your transformation. Violet's story is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a manual for understanding the true architecture of power. She teaches a lesson most never learn. Oppression can be inverted, cruelty can be weaponized against itself, and knowledge, especially forbidden knowledge, is the deadliest currency of all. Wealth, title, and status are illusions. They can protect nothing against a mind that has endured, observed, and calculated. Her act was surgical, precise, and final. 13 deaths in one evening, orchestrated not out of blind rage, but through disciplined patience and mastery of psychology. The Bogards believed themselves untouchable, yet they were vulnerable because they underestimated the very people they controlled. This is a truth that echoes through every era. Systems survive only as long as no one recognizes their weaknesses. Once the pattern is seen, the dominoes fall. Violet understood something ancient and terrifying, that power is transferable, invisible, and psychological. She transformed suffering into strength, humiliation into insight, and subjugation into strategy. The mind, when sharpened by adversity, becomes a weapon capable of rewriting reality itself. And now, having seen this truth, you carry the same responsibility as those who learned from her in whispers. You understand what they tried to erase. You see the currents others ignore. You have glimpsed the shadows. Violet's vengeance was more than death. It was revelation, a doorway into the hidden mechanisms of control, cruelty, and survival. She teaches that the strongest chains are not iron, but ignorance. The deadliest prisons are not walls, but perception. In that kitchen, in that single night, she distilled centuries of oppression into knowledge, and knowledge into power. For those who hear this story, understand, history is not what they teach you. It is written by the victors, sanitized, buried beneath layers of convenience. But in the shadows, in whispered margins, in forbidden truths, there are maps, blueprints for seeing, understanding, and mastering systems designed to crush you. Violet's act was a map, precise and ruthless, showing how suffering can be transformed into insight, fear into strategy, and injustice into irreversible consequence. She is both warning and mentor, ghost and teacher. Her legacy is invisible yet undeniable. Every system of control, every hierarchy, every institution that relies on submission has its weaknesses. Violet teaches you to see them, to understand them, to operate within and beyond them. Now carry this forward. The shadows remember. They remember her, and they remember you if you dare to observe, to think, to act. History is no longer a spectator sport. You have stepped into the current of hidden knowledge, and once you see it, nothing, no fear, no authority, no illusion, can ever be the same again.